Okay.
Oh, we are recording. So without further ado,
Okay.
Dr. Randall Mitchell.
Forgive me while I push buttons. This is most of what our lives is, right? So, Andrew, can you confirm you guys are seeing my title slide?
I can confirm, yes.
Good, then I will barrel ahead. So good. There's so many people. This is so great that you're all here and wanting to learn about pollinators. You've had some great speakers, really phenomenal folks. And Mary Gardner is fantastic. The next one should be continuing to move up. So what I want to do is talk to you today about bumblebees. They're about the coolest little critters I can imagine. They're the main reason that I'm in biology. I just think they're cool. There's a lot of good science to be done about them, but that's not really we'll all tell you that we're here for the science, but it's mostly because we love the creatures or the environment or the interaction that's going on. So what I want to do is tell you about some work we've done with bumblebees, but also set the stage because you guys are in a pollinator symposium, and one of the most prominent pollinators you're going to run into are these wonderful fuzzy little marvels. And so the context for that, and I don't have to say a lot of this, I think, for this audience, is that there's a ton of bees out there. We all know the honeybees, and they're really important agricultural animals. But they're only one of the many pollinators we have, the many bee pollinators. There's so much diversity. Look at all those pictures there from this amazing book by Wilson and Carroll. Just every color, size, shape. Some of them have long tongues, some have short tongues, some can carry pollen in various parts of their body. They have remarkable diversity. And each one of them does something a little different pollinator-wise, and pollination-wise. And that's how they affect us. All of these animals are giving us enormous benefits that we need to recognize. And the first thing to recognize is it's not just honeybees. Honeybees are really important, but they are, if we only base our thinking about bees on honeybees, it's as though we set our sights on how mammals work by studying cows. We'd know a lot. If all you knew was cows, you'd know a lot. But there's a lot of things about cows that don't apply to all the others. And that little this giant green, well, she's actually quite small, but this green bee up here in the top does very different things than this bumblebee down here, which does very different things than each of the others here. It's an incredibly diverse group. You can see the numbers, you can read as well as I can, but there's thousands of species of bee. In Ohio, we think 400. They're currently working on developing a list of all 400 because we're not sure which ones they are. But that's more diversity than so many other groups that many of us pay a lot of attention to. So bees in general are really diverse. That's lesson number one. Among them, the very best bee, the only one you should know, the one that I am most interested in, are bumblebees. I'm just going to keep showering you with pictures of these wonderful little animals. They are very cuddly. They're just so fuzzy. My girls and I, when they were little, we pet them when they're on flowers, because when they're on a flower, they're really not interested in stinging anyone. It's only when you bother their nest, like Mrs. Tiggywinkle over here. She gets a little upset when the mouse comes in to visit her. This interaction, the adorableness of bees has been part of our folklore for a very, very long time, even back to Beatrix Potter and whatnot. These animals are really important as pollinators. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And they have a number of features that make them especially important pollinators that we should pay attention to. I'm in Northeast Ohio. I work at the University of Akron, and it's important that I acknowledge those who came before me. When I arrived here back in '95, I had the great fortune of working for a while with Dr. Walt Macier at the University of Akron. He was one of the world's experts on bumblebee pollination. And when I first got here, he taught me how to identify the bees. He taught me all kinds of things about their biology. He told me some things I'll tell you later on. And I just, many of you may have taken classes with Dr. Macier, and he's has a warm part in our heart at the University of Akron. These bumblebees, from a practical point of view, and sooner or later we're going to have to talk about practical point of view. They make money for people. Your garden will have more fruit if you have bumblebees around. The farms will have more fruit. They are helping our wild plants, which are what support the wildlife we have and the wonderful amenities we have living in Northeast Ohio, where there's such amazing diversity. Most of our wild plants are depending on these pollinators. And so just if you're selfish, if you're not worried about protecting the wonderful world that we live in for its own sake, for your own sake, these animals are really important. And bumblebees are stars in this. They're really amazing pollinators for reasons I'm now going to tell you. Honeybees are great, but they're a jack of all trades. They can visit almost any flower, but they're not especially good at pollinating every kind of flower. Every honeybee is the same size, with the queen and the drone's a little different, but every honeybee in this little, I use a lot of graphs, so you're going to have to get used to them. So this along this direction here is how long the tongue is. And if you look at a honeybee worker, every one of them has a tongue, which determines how big a flower they can get nectar out of. That's about 6 millimeters long. So it's a fingernail long. These two bees here are sisters. They're bumblebees, Bombus impatiens, the common eastern butterbee. They're sisters. Look at this one. She's tiny. She's the size of a honeybee. She's got a tongue that's down here around 6 millimeters. But this sister here, who's a worker, might have twice as long a tongue. So she can visit flowers that nobody else could visit. And if you include queens in the picture, look at, they can visit many different flowers that aren't available. And you look at this flower here, there's a long tube. To get at that nectar, you're going to have to get down to the bottom of that. Now, this is a special flower because the tubes actually, this flower is closed. See how it's tightly up there? Let's see what happens when a bee starts to visit. So she goes to the top of that flower. Now, a honeybee can't do this. She's too weak, but look at that. This girl's in there and she's strong and she's going to push aside the pleated covering of this fringe, of this bottle gentian. Get down there. She's going to get in there, lick up the nectar. So she needs that long tongue to get down there. She's going to gather a little pollen, see the pollen in her pollen baskets on the backs on her legs, and out she comes and she's ready to go to another one. So right now she's grooming. She's moving that pollen off of the rest of her body down onto her pollen baskets. She'll take it home and feed it to her babies, or her mother babies, more precisely. And now she's going to try to get in this one. You can see it's a lot of work. Only certain bees can get in these flowers and pollinate them, but then they have access to food that no other bees have access to. So this is a native plant. It's not going to make you a lot of fruit that you can eat, but this plant depends on bumblebees in particular, or large bees in general, that can find a way to deal with the complicated floral mechanism there. And so, like so many plants, if you've got bumblebees around, you'll make more seeds. If you don't have the bumblebees around, you won't make the seeds. And so bumblebees, just by virtue of these things, are really important pollinators because some plants wouldn't make seeds without them. Now, they also have a couple of really interesting abilities. And I've borrowed this video that I'll talk over from Smithsonian. It's amazing. So this bee here, she's visiting this tomato family plant. It's a horse nettle. And she's going to vibrate her wing muscles without letting her wings move. She's put the clutch in. And so the wing muscles are vibrating, and she's grabbed onto the anthers, the yellow parts here with the pollen in them, so that with her mouth. And so it's going to start shaking. And look, the pollen's starting to fall out. The pollen is all piled up in there like gravel in a tube, and it's stuck just by friction. But once she starts to vibrate it, it gets loose. And then it spurts out. And this pollen will get all over her, and she can move it to other flowers. Look at that. And now she can take some to her babies, but while she's visiting the flowers, she'll also move the pollen around. This is called buzz pollination. And buzz pollination is a really important feature of some plants. Honeybees can't buzz pollinate. They just can't put the clutch in quite the same. And they're not quite big enough to make that happen. So it takes this particular bee to pollinate plants that require buzz pollination. Another feature of, excuse me, I'm starting to get excited and going too fast. I'll take a drink, slow down. Another feature of bumblebees is that they can warm themselves up. We've all been told that bees are cold-blooded. Well, that's not really true. They don't have a lot of means to change their temperature, but if they, once again, put the clutch in on their wing muscles, they can warm up. So this is the inside of an artificial nest box. It's just some plywood in an 8 by 8 inch thing. Got some upholstery felt cotton in there. And the bees have used this as a nest. And so we can pop the top off and look inside. A buddy of mine did this. And so here's the bees. There's some big ones and some little ones, and there they are. But if they put the clutch in and start to warm up their thorax here, see, there's the thorax, there's the abdomen and the legs. So the colors here represent the temperature of that bee. And you can see she's not the same temperature as the tweezers that are holding her. Her thorax is white hot. If you read, it's hard for you to read, but it's up there nearly 90 to 95 degrees that thorax is. And the rest of her is warm too. That means she can move when it's cold. So you can actually see these bumblebees warm up and visit daffodils in the spring when it's freezing outside, because they can takes the energy they've gathered from flowers, warm themselves up and be active. And they can also incubate the nest. So I'm going to show you a picture of the very same spot here, but with a thermal camera. And you can see that although the box itself is kind of cool, the white colors and the red colors are up there near our body temperature. So they're incubating their eggs in there. This is something that other bees can't do, or at least not as well for the most part. And so they're able to be active early in the year and late in the year when other bees are unable to move just because they aren't warm enough. So this means that early mornings and early in the year, like when blueberries are in flower, bumblebees might be an important pollinator when nothing else can be. And they're big enough and fuzzy enough, they can keep that heat and prevent themselves from losing it over time. It's about time I back up and remind you of the life cycle of these critters. It's perhaps surprising if you're thinking about honeybees. Honeybees, the queen will overwinter. So you'll have the queen this year, and if everything goes well, I'm crossing my fingers with my hives with the beekeeping club here at the University of Akron, we should have the same queen and workers the next spring if they can overwinter. But that's not what happens with bumblebees. So once again, we can't think only about honeybees. Honeybees are an example, but we're going to think about bumblebees, which are a wild animal. They have an annual life cycle. And so right at the start of the last fall, I took this picture over here. I think it was 2 years ago in the fall here. This is a queen bumblebee in the fall. This is a male bumblebee. He has a little yellow mustache right there. You can see that. That's one of the things that you can often see in many bees. They have yellow mustaches. Who knows why? He's much smaller than her, but he's doing the deed that he needs to do to make sure she has fertile eggs. And so they're going to mate. Here's the picture up here in this nice diagram. And then she's going to go down into the debris around the base of trees, in mulch, in your compost heap, places like that. And she's going to spend the winter over that whole time. Right now, she's frozen solid, a couple of inches down in the debris. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And that's where she is. They've got antifreeze in their body. So although they are unable to move and are at 32 degrees, they're not dead. They're just waiting. And so in the spring, March or so, sun will come down, warm up that spot on the ground. She's going to feel it. She's going to crawl out, and she's going to go and try to find a nest. And so if you see a little bee like this hovering around in the spring, around in front of a bunch of grass, she's thinking maybe there's an old mouse nest. Here's some examples of places that they might try to nest in. An old mouse nest that I can occupy, or a hole in the ground, or a crack between your bricks that leads into an open cavity where they can have a nice warm little nest for their babies. And so let me show you a picture of what that looks like. So here we are in the spring. You guys have been out on this walk there's so many nice parks up there in Ashtabula County. But you'll see a bee sort of sometimes crawling, sometimes buzzing around, sort of investigating. And what she's looking for is a little hole. So you see how she was under this log over here. And this is just with an iPhone. I'm just trying to take a little bit of a picture. She's just hunting around for a nice place to have a nest. And if she'll go into a lot of them, she'll come out and then go back in. And once she finds one that she thinks will be warm and dry and safe, she'll use that as her base of operations. And inside, she will make wax. She will exude wax out of the underside of her abdomen, just the way honeybees do, and then form it with her mouth into these little tiny pots, about the size of the tip of your pinky. And each one of those, whenever she visits a flower and drinks nectar or collects pollen, she'll bring it back and put it in the right kind of a pot. And then she will see the white eggs here. She'll lay some eggs in some other pots, and then she will feed them. And here's a bunch of little babies. Remember, these are just like butterflies, egg, larva, pupa, adult. She'll feed them, and they'll get bigger and bigger and bigger until they become the first brood for the year. So if she starts her nest in March or April, around May 1st, we start to see the first workers showing up for most of the species of bees that we have. Then those workers help her to raise other workers, and now they're getting food. And so there's exponential growth that will happen. And so by the end of June or July, there might be 200 or 300 bees in this colony. Now, that's not the way it is with honeybees. They've got thousands of bees, but they're in a different situation. They're going from the queen all by herself to the queen and her daughters who help her over the course of the summer. I'm short on time, but I still think this is a useful story. You may have read the Little House on the Prairie stories, where Ma and Pa and Laura and all of them would be out in the middle of nowhere trying to make a living. They would build a house out of the sod, completely independent. You know, they'd buy some flour from the store, but other than that, they did everything themselves. That is nothing compared to what this queen bumblebee is doing. She's starting off with just herself. Pa's dead. He died last fall. She's pregnant. She's going to find a house. She's going to start making the house out of her own body by making the wax. She's going to gather all the food that's necessary for her to make that, and to make the eggs, and then to feed her babies all by herself. The most dangerous time for a bumblebee colony is that period, because it's really hard. It's only her. And so early in the year, when you see those queen bumblebees, be extra nice to them. They are the future. Without them, we don't get the youngsters who do so much important pollination. But it all starts with just the queen. So I sort of talked to you about all the stuff on the left here that's engraved. And I've now expanded the pattern here. So here we are in early summer. You've got a queen and a few workers, and it gets bigger, and then she's got more, and then she's got more. And then at the end of the year, they'll make future queens and males, because you got to have both of them, right? And so the males from one colony will mate with the females from another, and they'll go on, and then there are fertilized eggs, and the circle has been completed. And so let me see, I've got it slightly ahead of myself here for the pictures, but there we are. At that point, so it's October, the old queen, she's going to die. The workers, they're all going to die. All that's left usually by October are the males, the drones. So here's a male of the brown-belted bumblebee. See the little brown belt down here? And see how compared to the other bees, he has giant eyes and extra long antennae. Not all male bees have big eyes, but this particular species does. And it's actually, he's a visual mater. He watches for her. The others mostly smell. So the others, you won't necessarily see the big eyes, but late in the year, you'll sometimes see only drones visiting your flowers. It's sedum at my house. They're just all over the sedum. It's just males. They're just hanging around where the food is, hoping that some unmated queen comes by. That's all they have to do in their lives. Whereas the queens, the new queens, they get mated, and then they try to find somewhere to overwinter. And last fall, I had this wonderful experience where I happened to see this happening just in the park, actually just down 2 doors down from my house. So here's a video I took, and it's a little shaky. It's just an iPhone, but here she is. Here's a queen. It's in October, and she's found a spot. I'm going to overwinter here, is what I think she's saying. So she's digging down. She's going to get underneath all that mulch, and that's where she's going to spend the winter. And I came back. I never saw her come back out again in the spring, because what are the odds? But I'm pretty sure this is where this particular eastern bumblebee overwintered. So deep breath. That's sort of the colony life cycle. It's a good thing to know about. It's a really fundamental to our understanding of these bees. But I want to go back to the middle of the year, because those little workers, and the queens too, but it's easier to study the workers, do a lot of really interesting things. So Dr. Macier and I talked about this, and he was talking about one time he was doing research in the Grand Tetons. And he was marking bumblebees. You see on one of my slides, you put a dot of glue and then a numbered tag on the bee, and then you can follow the same bee in the field and see whether she does different things or the same things over the course of the day. And they do you learn a lot when you mark a bee and follow it. So he marked this worker bee and forgot her in his car. She was okay, but it was 6 p.m, it's getting dark. I'm sorry, and he had driven 6 miles from where he caught her. There's no way he could take her back. So, and if he kept overnight, didn't think she'd make it. So there was 6 miles from where he marked her. He just opened the jar and she flew away. And the next morning, when he arrived at the place where he had marked her, 6 miles from where he had released her, she was there foraging. So we know from work like that these little bees have a map in their head. They can move around. They are definitely reasoning their way through navigation. And so nobody really could do much more than that. And I've sort of spilled the beans here with the picture that you're seeing, but nobody really knew much more than Dr. Macy had learned by accident until recently, when these bees have radar antennas glued to their back. Not very, it's 1 or 2 bees we can do this to and see what happens. And so we can use this from a captive colony. We can see where the bee goes. So I'm going to show you the life history of travel of one bee in the next slide. It's a little complicated, so bear with me. I think it's worth it. The blue dot is the nest in England. And this is a giant field, agricultural, a suite of fields. You can see there's 2 football fields in this dark line here. So here's the original spot, and each of these lines is the trip of the bee out and back that's been recorded with the radar. Is this cool or what? So the first flight she took is in bright green. So you can see the green line here is the first few flights she took. And you see, she just was exploring. Just look, this bee had never been there before, but she flew around trying to find where might be a good spot to get food, because that's all the worker bees want to do is get food. They won't make any eggs themselves. They're not able to. But if they provide food to their sisters, the daughters of their mother, then that's how they succeed. So these bees are exploring around trying to find food. And you can see that by about the 70th trip, the yellow colors, she found somewhere over here and she started visiting, and she went back out to get food. There's a patch of thistle there. She'd get the thistle, she'd drink the nectar, lick it up, gather the pollen, and then she'd take it back to the nest. Take about an hour to do the trip out and back. So she'd do 8 or 10 trips a day, out and back and out and back. There's a special word we use when something goes in a straight line from spot to spot, and it's a beeline. This is a literal beeline that these animals are doing. Honeybees do this as well. We know a lot about honeybee navigation because of some amazing work that's been done. So back and forth, but then, 100 some odd trips later, you can see that suddenly there's something happened. And it turns out the farmer cut down the thistle. It was time to harvest that field. And so the bee, you can't quite see it. I think it's this little dotted line here. On that trip, the bee went out, there was no thistle. You can see this little gray line going around here. Sort of a question mark appears over her head. And then what does she do? It doesn't look as though she went straight back home. It looks like she just sort of went off, and then she went over to somewhere she hadn't visited since several days earlier, back in her exploration, to where there's another patch of thistle. So this animal had in its head a map that it remembered days and days later, and then used that to shift over to a different place to get food from. I'm just so happy. It's wonderful, wonderful findings from a very difficult experiment that these folks did. Now, the next picture is really scary, but I'm going to show it for a reason. Don't panic. This is panel A. This is the one we just saw with the bee that explored. Then she found a good patch, and then she went to another patch. Look at BB. This bee did not have the same behavior. Look at it. I've got students like this. They wander and wander and wander. They never really find what they want. And look, on the 30th trip, off she goes, and we never see her again. This one over here, The others are mostly showing something similar to this: search, find a good spot, and go back to it. Maybe 2 good spots. These bees have personality. Each one is a little different. Each one has a repeatable difference. It's fascinating. I just love this kind of stuff. Okay, deep breath, because we're going to shift over now from sort of background on bumblebees to bumblebees of Ohio. And so here's a rogues gallery of the most common bees we're going to see. And Dr. Macy here told me about this. When I came in, I said, I know the bumblebees of California, okay. Which ones am I going to see here? And he showed me these 4 bees here on the left: Bombus impatiens. I'm going to go back and forth between common names and scientific names, but these 4 here, look at how different they are. Here's one with a little bit of yellow. This has 2 stripes of yellow. This one has a stripe of yellow and then sort of a crescent or a W of yellow. And this one here has some brown. These 4 here are the ones you're going to see. You're going to see these in your backyard. You're going to see them in the woods. You're going to see them everywhere. These are the common bees we have. If you're lucky, you might see a couple others. And he showed me these 4 and these 3 and one other. And he said, these are the 8 bees you're going to see. There's a couple others that occasionally occur. You're not going to see them very often at all. I'll talk about the 8th one in a minute. Now, we're still early in your pollinator symposium. You haven't had a chance to learn a lot about these, but each of these is a bee. And in fact, it's a bumblebee. Bumblebees are distinctive. On their hind legs, they can carry pollen on a big flattened area, just like a honeybees. Look how much pollen she's got there, but it's flattened and glistening almost on see this one here, you can see that glisten there. That's one of the distinctive features of bumblebees. There's some technical characters too, but there's a lot of things that like to look like bumblebees in art. And so for this crowd, I want to make sure you've seen this. So here's some creatures. Some of these are bumblebees and some are not. Take a minute, take a look. I'm not going to test you because I've never taught you before, and it's really inconvenient to do a test here. But you could probably see some of these look. This one has a shiny butt, and this one here has a really wide head. And what's going on with this one here? He's got a furrow between his eyes, and this one's kind of got giant eyes too, and tiny antennae. Some of these are not bumblebees. In fact, only one. This is the only bumblebee on this page here. This is a bumblebee. This is a leafcutter bee that looks for all the world like a bumblebee, a worker bumblebee. This is a fly. Here's another fly, a robber fly. This is a predator. They sometimes eat bumblebees. And then there's several types of bee that mimic the color. And the thought is that it seems that having the bright contrast of black and yellow tells possible predators, I might be able to sting you. And then there's a benefit to looking like something that can sting you. If you're a fly, it makes you look like you're dangerous. If you're a bee, it makes you look like something they are already scared of. And so the thought is that there's a lot of mimics out there that are, in a sense, trying to look like bumblebees. There's others that try to look like wasps and others that try to look like honeybees and so forth. And try is, I'm using the loosest possible way, but there appears to be an advantage to looking like a bee. And if you're going to be out there looking at bees, you ought to be aware that sometimes what you think is a bumblebee isn't. So that's your bonus piece of information for the evening. Now, I've done a lot of studies up in Wisconsin with a buddy of mine. We've been studying this plant here, which is found in wetlands. And each of many years we've been out there, we keep track of how many bees we see visiting this plant. And what I just want to show is over time, it's changed. You can see this red says that in 2002, the Bombus fervidus, which is this one here that's almost all yellow and has a black stripe between its wings, that was our most common bumblebee. But by the time we get to 2017, it's not present. Instead, mostly it's this color here, which is Bombus vagans, the half black bumblebee. That's this one here. There's 2 stripes of yellow on its abdomen. Most of the way you identify bees is by the pattern of color on their abdomen. This is the common eastern bumblebee, Bombus impatiens, and you can see it's been around on and off through the whole time. It only has a little stripe there. This here is amazing. It's actually declining. This is Bombus pennsylvanicus, the American bumblebee, crazy name. Almost all yellow, and it's the size of your thumb. It's a gigantic bee, really a cool animal. What I'm seeing here is something's going on. Now, maybe this is normal. Maybe just all bees change in abundance, because this is just one site. Maybe a field was changed, or maybe the way the places they could overwinter have been altered. But that doesn't tell me what's going on over the whole country, which is why nobody relies on this data. This is just to show that I'm seeing changes. I wonder what's going on. And some folks got together and did a giant survey. And so this is another, I'm giving you guys some hardcore stuff here because I think it's important. Don't worry. First, I want you to look at, these are all maps of the US. Ignore everything except the black. And you can see that the black tells us where particular types of bees were found when they looked at nearly 100,000 museum records. So, you know, when entomologists catch an insect, they put it on a pin and they put a little tag on it that says where and when. They went back to a bunch of those and asked, where have each of these different species of bee been found? And you can see, here's Bombus terricola. It's only found, it's a Canadian bee and the very northern tier. That's what the black's telling us. Whereas this Bimaculatus, a bee that we have quite commonly here, is most of the eastern US, although more common up in this region. They went out to as many places as they could over the eastern US, and each place they went is one of these circles. So here's a yellow circle. It's a big yellow circle. And if you go down here, that means they caught 500 bees. And over here's a little one, and that means they caught 50 bees. And in each circle, the red color tells you what fraction of the bees they found were that species. And so you can see for Bombus pennsylvanicus, there's red down here in Texas, but you hardly ever find it up here in Ohio and along the northern tier states. This is a southern bee, but it didn't used to be. It used to be really common up in Michigan. You go to Bimaculatus and you see that it's kind of found where it used to be found. There's no black down here in Texas, and they didn't find it when they looked because these circles have no red in them. And then we go, the most common bee we have is Bombus impatiens, and it looks like it's doing great. The black tells us where it used to be found, and we find it there. And then we look over here. There's no red for Bombus affinis. This is the rusty patched bumblebee. Here, there's no red almost at all for Bombus terricola, the yellow banded bumblebee. And there's used to be, the Pennsylvanicus was common up here in the north, and it's no longer. We're losing some bumblebees. There's fewer than there used to be where they used to be common. Dr. Macier kept telling me this Bombus affinis, or nobody can tell me whether it's affinis or affinis, I don't know. The rusty patch bumblebee is one of the bees you're going to see commonly. I collected it in the year 2000 in my backyard in Akron. I collected it, or my students found it in Furnace Run Metro Park in the Cuyahoga Valley. My students found it in the oak openings of Toledo in 2000. And that's almost the end of their story. Because since my students and a couple others, it's only been found twice in Ohio since 2002. Terricola was never common in Ohio, you can see from this map, but we're worried about it. It is now on the endangered species list. And so this is an issue. Here's what it looks like. See how it's got a little rusty patch? See, it's got a stripe of yellow and then a stripe of yellow with some orange in the middle. That's how you tell this bee. The brown belted bumblebee looks a little bit like it, but it doesn't have that yellow around the rusty color. This bee went on the federal endangered species list in 2016. It's one of the very few insects that is on that list. And that means it has federal protection. It means that if you're going to build a road and it's possible that it might damage habitat for this animal, you've got problems. And the Ohio Department of Transportation heard that and said, boy, it would be nice to know, does this bee exist in Ohio? Because there's been just one or two sightings of it since 2000. Maybe it's extinct. If it's not extinct, we need to know because we got to protect it. We can't build roads. It's going to be a big deal. And so they put forward money and said, does anyone want to go and hunt up this bee? And I put my hand up. And a buddy of mine, Karen Goodell at OSU, who's the other major bumblebee student in the state, said, I'd like to do it. And we looked at each other and said, why don't we do it together? So we got money from the Department of Transportation, for gosh sakes, which is not a place I usually find money to pay students, to survey the entire state of Ohio to see if the rusty patch bee can be found. And if it's found, what are the good habitats for this bee? What can we find ways of predicting where it will be and where it won't be, so that we can, the Department of Transportation in particular, can make decisions. And so we did three things. We went out and looked everywhere we could. We tried to figure out what habitats they liked. And we also recruited the members of the community to join with us. And so here's my students doing my favorite thing in the whole world. And we're just trying to find the bees. And so I'll give you an idea of what it takes to hunt for bees. It's very technical. You go out with a net and a good pair of eyes and some training. You have to know what you're looking for, which bee is which. And it takes a little while to learn. But if you catch them, you don't have to kill them. You put them in a jar or even in a Ziploc bag, and then you can take a picture of them. It's hard to get the glare out, but a little practice, you can do that. And you just go and find all the bees you can in an hour and a half in a football field full of flowers. And we did that about 300 sites in the state of Ohio in 2 years. And so I'm going to show you quickly some of the results. This isn't a research seminar, so I'm going to skate fast over that, but just give you a flavor of what we found. We found a lot of honeybees. We found 14,000 honeybees and over 10,000 bumblebees. And a bunch of all the other bees too. We didn't focus on them. There's probably a lot more of them, but we were looking for big bees, and it's easy to record a honeybee while you're at it. So first notice, there's a lot of honeybees out there. They might be eating some of the food that bumblebees would like. That might be a problem for them. There's not much we can do about that because honeybees live here and there's no way we would get rid of them. But it's useful to know that they're probably the single most common species of bee that we found. Here's where we looked. I'm sorry, it's 300 surveys, but 200 different locations. We sometimes went twice, almost every county in the state. And this number doesn't, I think the numbers I showed you before were for the first year. So we have over 25,000 bumblebees that we identified. So which species did we find? Here they are. This pie chart shows you about half of them, the gray here, is the common eastern bumblebee with one stripe. We knew that was going to happen. The second most is the brown belt. See the brown belt there? No yellow around it, just a brown belt. Bombus griseoculus, as we like to call it, or the brown belt bumblebee, takes up another quarter of the bees. And then the two-spotted bumblebee, see the two little spots and a little dot? She takes up most of the rest. And then all the others are what we're going to call rare bees. And so if we looked close there, not a single one of them, out of 25,000 bumblebees, not a single one was either of these rare species. In other words, the abundance of the rusty patched bumblebee in Ohio is less than 1 out of 25,000. And that's so close to zero, I'm going to call it zero. I think it's extinct in Ohio. It still exists in Iowa, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, and West Virginia. And I think also Virginia recently had a finding. That's all. And if you remember that map, it used to be found everywhere. It was the bee that my kids would play with in the backyard. It's gone. It's very sobering. We don't know, we'll talk more about causes, but the short answer is we don't know why. But it seems to be doing okay where it still exists. We would love to figure out why Ohio, what it is about Ohio and the many other states that's caused the problem for this bee, but we just don't know what it is. We could though, I mean, all this work, it would be sort of sad if we spent 2 years and gazillions of hours in the field and all we had to say at the end was, we didn't find that bee. But we did find 25,000 other bees. What can we learn about them? Here's a little bit. So here's some of the rare bees, the all yellow bumblebee, the perplexing bumblebee, the half-black bumblebee, one that looks a lot like Pennsylvanicus, like the American bumblebee. And then this one's a cuckoo bumblebee that sneaks into nests and takes over from the queen. We saw enough of those we could do an analysis. And so we compared what kind of habitat we were in and how many of these species, because we always found these top three. And what we found was natural fields and areas that were planted to be pollinator habitat, really good. But roadsides were not, they were supporting bees, but not the rare bees. And that seems like something important to know. I'm a big fan of having roadsides that are pollinator habitat, and they are supporting bees. But as far as these particular rare bumblebees, they're not going to be the whole solution. You're going to have to go and find some natural fields or plant up some prairies or do some things like that to help those other rare bees. We also could say, which plants do these bees like to visit? And the answer is probably not a surprise to you if you've been watching. Bee balm is our winner by far. They just love Monarda. They also love milkweed. They love coneflower. They love goldenrods. Those are all natives. Now, the four in the middle here are not natives, but they're really good for bees. So if you're a conservationist, you have a bit of a challenge here. If you grow red clover, you're not growing a native plant, but you are helping bees. Same with these others. So there's some conundrums to be dealt with. The short answer is plant some natives and you're going to do good. We'll talk more. We also looked at the landscape. So remember, we know that bees can fly a long way. And so it might matter not just what's right where they are, but what's within a mile or two or three of their colony. And so every place that we did a sample in the center of each of these circles is a spot that we did our bee survey. And so here you can see the brown here is farm fields. And you can see there's lots of farm fields for this area, almost very few for this and almost none over here. The red is city. And so we used a 3-mile circle around these and looked to see how the cropland had an effect. So this one here had almost no cropland, a little bit of cropland, a lot. And you can see in general, we found more bumblebees if there was less cropland. And that usually meant forest and woods and natural areas, but it sometimes meant city. These bumblebees actually like cities pretty well. So these are some of the kinds of information that we were able to get out of this search for the rusty patch, even though we couldn't find the darn bee. But that wasn't all of the arrows in our quiver. We also were recruiting people like you. In fact, I'm recruiting you right now. We have been keeping, we set up a place called iNaturalist, which many of you know about, and explaining would take longer than I have time for now. But if you go look for iNaturalist online for the Ohio Bee Atlas, what you can do is look there, and we have over 36,000 photos of bees. About 10,000 of those are bumblebees. And on there, we can, you can see over here, here's the most commonly seen species. Once you post that picture, we include where it is. And then people like me will look at the pictures and say, you've got this bee or you've got that bee. And you then find out what bee you've had a picture of, and we get information about where the bees are found. And this is a way we were hoping someone would snap a picture of the rusty patch, but they didn't. But hold that thought. So the citizen science has been very good because it's got a lot of people thinking about bees and taking pictures of bees, and has given us some useful information. We've been doing some analyses to see whether it tells us the same thing that our in-person surveys, which are so difficult to do. And it turns out it's a pretty good first step. Let me see. I'm going to just very briefly tell you a couple of things and wrap up. I don't want to overstay my welcome here. You are probably asking, so what's going on? You've heard about pollinator declines in general because honeybees are having some problems, but native bees, including the rusty patch, but many other bees are having problems too. And I will briefly tell you that there's no simple answer to why any of those things are happening. The most likely reason for this pollinator decline is that some combination of these things is having an effect. We're destroying their habitat. Even when the habitat persists, it's not as good as it used to be. And we're spraying them with pesticides. And on top of that, there's some diseases that are starting to spread. And climate change and exotics are probably an issue as well. The work so far to date points for the rusty patch seems to point to the diseases. I'm not going to explain this slide. It takes a little while, but it looks like diseases probably are the answer, but we're not certain. But we know for sure that for all of these animals, some of these pesticides are nasty. They don't always kill the bee, but they can mess them up. They can, in this one here, if you like to read graphs, so this is the number of queens that a nest will produce. And you can see if you don't give them any pesticide, they make lots of queens. And if you give them even a little bit, they make almost none. One of the themes that comes out is these pesticides they're at sublethal doses, but they hurt them. The same way that a person who has too much lead won't be killed, but they'll have problems. These and they can compound if there's not enough food and they get exposed to pesticides, there could be extra problems. That's that synergistic issue that may arise. So this in fact, one of the effects of this particular type of pesticide is it makes the bees forget where they are and they get lost, literally. And you saw how they use navigation a lot. That it literally messes with the receptors in their brains. I mean, the easy way is it messes them up, but we can track it down to the molecular mechanisms. But that's the bottom line is it's making it hard for them to find their way home. So I'm sorry, that's not happy. The solution there, you can probably figure out what the solutions for this is. The disease is harder, but what I do want to do is at least give a little bit note of positive, because remember all that citizen science up there somewhere. I'm not somewhere in Northeast Ohio. I tell you, I can't remember. It's either Lake or Ashtabula County. So I'm talking to you guys. Last July, a picture appeared of this bee, and it was someone who'd been to one of my classes, and oh my gosh, look at that bee. That sure looks like the yellow-banded Bommus terricola, one of the bees that has that. The last time it was seen in Ohio was, I don't know, 1960. It almost never occurred in Ohio, and there's a picture, and it sure as heck is. And so we struck up a conversation, and we talked about where it is, and I'm going to go out there this spring and summer and find this darn bee. I've never seen this one in person. It's found in New York and Canada, but not here. I'm just so excited. We've now added a bee to Ohio's list of current bees. It's pretty rare, but it's there. So you should all be looking out. When you see bees, take pictures and post them by Naturalist. I'd love to see them. So that's my good news. I'll end up by just telling you, this is a question that would occur to me. What can I do? Support your parks. Support the people who are supporting conservation. Those are the folks who are doing good things. You know the groups, you work with them all the time, and Ag Extension works with them all the time. So they are doing good work. In your own yard, just use as few pesticides as possible. You can use some once in a while, but don't use a lot. Pay attention to it. And if you follow the label, you're going to be okay. In your yard, have some places where these bees can nest and overwinter. Grow the plants that they love. The bees will tell you what flowers they want. Walk through your neighbor, see what your neighbor's planted that they like, plant more of that. But you should also have some spots where there's compost or a little unkempt. That's where these animals like to be. Somewhere that's a little out of the way, a little neglected. They like. An old mouse nest is good. It cracks between bricks. They like a little cavity. And then when they're there, be nice to them. They are not going to bother you. They will only sting if you bother their nest, and you won't bother their nest because they're pretty well hidden. And then enjoy them. These animals are publicity hounds. They are so attractive. They behave in ways that reward you if you watch them, and you won't protect what you don't love. So if you start watching them, you'll start loving them. And then we're going to work on it. And I will stop there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. That was awesome. We appreciate you being on again, and we will now go to some questions. I will make one point and plug for future programming in our fifth installment of this year's program. We're going to have a presentation that's called BioBlitz Your Backyard, and we're going to be covering some of those applications using using those to not only identify but help connect researchers such as yourself with different species, so that we can track these things. So we're very excited about that. That's not this coming one, but it's the final installment of this series, so you're not going to want to miss that.
Cool.
Awesome. So if you want, go ahead, you can open the Q&A box, and again, we're probably not going to have time to answer everybody's questions, unfortunately, but we'll take a look. We'll see if there's any common ones. We'll see if there's any ones that we want to get answered, but we appreciate everybody hopping on tonight. And if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. If you want to hop off, you're more than welcome. We'll see you next week, but thanks everybody, and let's look at some questions. Any of them jumping out to you?
Several people are asking how to help them nest on your property, and my buddies, when I was at Rocky Mountain Biology Lab, they would put out these plywood 8x8 squares with a hole and some upholsterer's cotton in there, and they got about 10% occupancy. So
wow.
Don't get your hopes up with those. There's a lot of stuff on the web about possible ways. Some people have found that bluebird boxes made out of PVC pipe actually get occupied by bees pretty well. Old bluebird boxes do get used, and some people have been using turned over flower pots, like a terracotta pot with a tube that goes underground a while and then pops up. Sometimes they use those. The nice thing about that is it's something you probably have laying around anyhow. But I think that if that's really what you want to do, go to the web. Someone's got different ideas, and you should find things that resonate for you. Nobody's figured this out. This is an area where amateurs could make real contributions. Just try different things. What do they want? But it does appear that no one knows for sure, but we think that one of the main limiting factors for bumblebees is a nest site. And so setting them up is good. So I'm going to go a little rogue on that and go just a little further. Mouse nests seem to be a really good nest site for them, but it's hard to encourage people to have mouse to encourage mice nests. So that's an issue. But one of the really interesting stuff lately has been that it's a two-step process. So this guy in Britain, his grad student trained a dog to this, how they train dogs for drugs and things, trained him to build nests. And so they found nests early enough because usually we can't find them at all. They're really hard to find a wild nest. But what they did was they found it, and then they took one of those bore scopes. It's like they use for an endoscopy where it's a flexible camera, and they snaked it down to see what was going on, and they just watched. And they found that it wasn't an old mouse nest, it was an active mouse nest. And the bees and the mice would pass each other in the hallways. It was absolutely crazy. So we don't know really where they're nesting it naturally, and we don't really know what we can do that will help them nest. So experiment, but cavities with a little bit of insulation, sometimes underground, but some species like to be at bird nest height. So try things.
Awesome. Let's see.
These bees do not overwinter. So the answer is 0 are in an overwintering colony. The queens just wear out and die as the season ends. So it's probably most directly a temperature thing, but they're also just, they don't last more than a year. They can only overwinter the one time. The queen is picked by being at the end of the year. It's similar to with Honeybees, they get fed a royal jelly-like substance and they get big. The workers are undernourished in that sense, but also chemically inhibited from developing their egg producing ability.
The NC asked if bumblebees have any predators.
Oh yeah, all the insect predators, birds. There's types of wasps that are predators on them. There's a ton of insects, mites that are parasites on them. Lots of diseases. They're like every other animal. There's plenty of things that lead them. They can defend themselves, but and so the stings are especially effective against like skunks and critters like that will break into a nest. But when they're flying out on a flower, they'll just get gobbled up by birds.
Awesome. There's some questions relating honeybees and bumblebees. One person asked if they can get mites like honeybees, and then someone else, asked if they can coexist with each other.
Yeah, I've very specifically chosen not to pick a fight with the honeybee people on this. You can, I think there's really good evidence that they can compete with one another, but I'm also completely convinced that the things we do that will help honeybees will almost certainly help bumblebees, like more food, less pesticides, and the things that we do for bumblebees that will also help honeybees. So I think that there's no need to be antagonistic about that. Yeah, so that's where I'll go there. Mite-wise, they get different types of mites. Every type of bee gets some sorts of mites. A lot of them are no problem. They're just a hitchhiker. They don't affect the bee. Others of them, like the varroa mite for honeybees, and there's some evidence that varroa mites are starting to show up on bumblebees. They and also the tracheal mite, which clogs their breathing tubes. Those sorts of things those can be real parasites. But if you look at enough bumblebee pictures, and you look carefully, you're going to see lots of little mites just about the size of the toes on the toe pads on the end of their feet. They can have dozens or hundreds of them. And
go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say the questions keep rolling in. We'll answer 3 or 4 more here for everybody. Again, sorry that we can't answer all of them, but I also want to direct your attention, Dr. Mitchell, to the chat bots. There's a ton of people that are heading out just saying thank you and how much they appreciate the presentation and the knowledge. So,
do you know how nice it is? 10 years ago, if I was to give a talk like this, there'd be like 3 people and 2 of them would leave. This is just so exciting that people care about bees.
Yeah, it's really something, and we're happy to have you for sure. Yeah, do you see any more that?
There's some interesting questions, like what can we do with these rare bees and reintroduce Finnis? There's a national conversation going on. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with that, and they're developing plans for if we can figure out what's wrong, why they went extinct in the first place. We have to fix that first. What's the point of reintroducing them if we don't know why they went extinct here in the first place? If we can figure that out, there's people right now working where the rare species are common, trying to learn how to raise them, because it's really hard to raise bumblebees in captivity. They're wild animals, and there's a lot of tricks to trade. It turns out, some people have figured it out, but they use them as trade secrets because there's a commercial bumblebee industry and they won't tell other people how to do it right. We're trying to break through the trade secrets on that and see if we can get any progress. But there are plans to do it, but that's probably 10 years, 30 years in the future, because I don't, until we know what the problem is, I don't think it's a wise use of our energy to try to reintroduce them. It's like bringing back mammoths and introducing them to the tropics. iNaturalist just post pictures. That's all we really need. Once you got on iNaturalist, you'll figure out that it's Facebook for nature geeks, and you may find it's your people. It is for me.
Yeah, and again, I'll plug that final one, the BioBlitz, Your Backyard. Our final presentation will be covering all kinds of apps, including iNaturalist and Seek. if you're not using Seek to help you identify plants and insects, I highly recommend it. It's made my life a lot easier.
In case you don't know, Seek is sort of the
Yeah.
shoot of Naturalist, so they're connected directly.
Yeah, so I use it if I see a plant that I'm not familiar with. I try to identify it with that, and then if I think it's something of importance, you can just click a button and you put it up on iNaturalist. It's really nice.
It's so fun.
Awesome. All right, maybe one more. See if you can find one more question in there.
Oh, there's so many good ones. Oh, I'm seeing more perplexes. That's exciting. Let's see here. The honey they make is just little tiny bits. They don't swarm. Relate rather than just scroll through and then this little bumblebee nest is there, and it's very valuable. It's got wax, it's got eggs, it's got workers, it's got honey, it's got pollen, and there's a whole group of bumblebees, particular species, that are specialized on being kleptoparasites. They sneak in the nest, they kill the queen, and then the workers, the usurper chemically controls them, and then she lays eggs and they raise her babies, which they're not related to. So it's like a cuckoo. And so that's one of the predators, so to speak, that they run into. And it's they don't swarm, but they do have this peculiar situation where they can shift to a new species. Anytime you find a nest, there's another website called Bumble Bee Watch, and they're very focused on bumblebee nests. If you take a picture of that and then post it to Bumble Bee Watch, they love it, because they're actually, from citizen science like this, figuring out which species nest in trees, which species nest in logs, which species nest underground. And so some people have mentioned seeing nests, and that's really important natural history information that's really hard to get. You stumble on it, and who do I tell? That's who you tell.
Awesome. Well, again, can't say enough. We appreciate you coming and speaking to our group, and I appreciate everybody that hung around and asked questions. And again, sorry we can't get to it all, but we hope to see you in 2 weeks here at the same Zoom link for our next presentation. Dr. Gardner is next up on the list. But you can view this again or share with your friends. It will be on our website shortly. Again, I want to thank Dr. Mitchell, and feel free if you have questions about today's events, future events, reach out to me. You can find Dr. Mitchell's information as well. But I see a lot of thank yous in the chat. And I think that'll wrap it up for the night. We'll end things there. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.